Let me know when we're on.
See this.
Hi, so I see that the meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. Want to let everyone know that we're on. If you're part of the meeting but not speaking for now, if you'd be willing to mute yourself, that would be great. And we could cut down on background noise. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Delegate Michelle Guyton, and I represent District 42B in Baltimore County. And I'm so happy to welcome you to our virtual town hall meeting on educational equity during COVID-19. This is really one of the most timely and important issues facing our children and our community at this time. And this is really a different format from any other town hall meetings that I've done before. Usually I stand at the front and field questions, and I think I'm gonna like this better actually. I am going to let our panelists speak to you and give you information, and then I'm going to be a conduit for your questions from the public to them. So we do have a lot of questions. We put out a request for questions from the public and really an overwhelming response. So I will get to as many as I can, but we also really want to be respectful of everyone's time. So if we don't get to your question, we will try to follow up with you after this meeting. So we're not ignoring you. We just have a lot to cover, and this is a big topic. So first I would really like to introduce and thank a few special guests who are here, who are not necessarily speaking and presenting on the panel, but who are here to answer questions and to learn from all of you. First of all, Delegate Eversole is still here. I thought he had disappeared. Delegate Eversole is the chair of the subcommittee in Ways and Means for Early Childhood, and it also covers special education. So it's really important and fabulous that he's here with us today. And I'm sure later that he may be willing to answer questions at the end if anyone has one to direct to him about General Assembly issues. We also have, I'm going to see Dr. Schlager from Kennedy Krieger Institute. And yep, there he is. We're so happy to have you here with us today. We also have Marie Van Stone, and I don't see Linda anymore. We have several folks from Kennedy Krieger, and we will give you an opportunity at the end to ask your questions of them as well. Let's see, in addition, we have Dr. Rachel Jones, who is the Community Superintendent for Baltimore County Public Schools. And then I also really want to thank my staff for putting this together. This is sort of a Herculean feat for those of us who are not technologically savvy. Lisa McCullen, who is always fabulous, Wyatt Hinton, and I also want to introduce everyone to Corey Johns. Corey will be taking over as my Chief of Staff as of July 1st, so you'll all get to know him very, very well. So I want to get started and tell you a little bit about the panelists and about the format for tonight. So all of my guests are in particularly challenging situations tonight. They're very busy, and their willingness, all of your willingness to engage in this conversation, which is so important, is greatly, greatly appreciated. I want to tell you how we're going to do it. We will ask questions of our first two. I know Dr. Williams has a strict time of 7 o'clock where he needs to leave us, so we'll try to address everything we need to him before that time. And we appreciate that time because we know how busy you are. And then if you would like to ask a question, go to Facebook chat, write it on there, and our staff will be monitoring those during this presentation. So our first speaker tonight is going to be the State Assistant Superintendent of Early Intervention and Special Education Services, Marcella Franczkowski. Marcella has been at the department in this position since 2011. She has a lot of experience in both general and special education and administration, and she's right here from Baltimore County, so she knows a lot of you from her experiences here. From my work with her, I know that she has been a proactive and transformative cheerleader for our kids with special education, and we are so proud and pleased to have her present to us. So I'm going to hand it over to Marcella Franczkowski.
Thank you, Michelle, and it is a pleasure that I'm with you again for the same mission to support our students and families, so thank you for that. Michelle, can I have access? Can you let me in so that I can show my PowerPoint slides?
We will certainly do that.
Thank you.
Corey will do that.
Thank you, Corey. Save me.
He's going to save me too, because I'm not sure how.
Okay. So Michelle is correct. It's like a homecoming for me. I began my career very early in the Baltimore County Public School System and served there for over 30 years in that community. And it was quite, it shaped my entire leadership to this day. So I am very thankful to the Baltimore County Public Schools and the community. Tonight, on behalf of Dr. Karen Salmon, our state superintendent of schools, I bring very warm greetings as well as well wishes from the Maryland State Department of Education. As your assistant state superintendent of early intervention and special education services, I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this discussion that is so critical and timely regarding educational equity during our COVID-19 pandemic, and in partnership with the leadership of the Baltimore County Public Schools with Dr. Williams. This evening, I will share information because Michelle asked that I give parents that look, that understanding, that expectation of what is and who are we and how we are supporting our children and families during this extended school closure. So I would like to share some of this information with you. So as we look, and I'm going to now switch to the slides. As we look at the pandemic and how it affected Marylanders, I just want to share with you that MSDE began immediately into action to address the health and safety of our children and communities. While we worked to continue providing that continuity of critical services to the greatest extent possible, we began and we started very powerfully and responsively to nutrition, childcare, and education. So to date, I can just share with you that we have served, MSD has been a partner in serving over 13 million meals to our school-age children. It was across 600 sites, and now it has extended into the summer months. So we're very excited about that. For our childcare, we initially began providing childcare for essential workers, the children of essential workers, and now we are reopening. That option is for all. As you know, we're in phase 2. And that reopening is that all facilities may open. And I know to date, I just checked this today, 63% of our childcare facilities have reopened. And then finally, but surely not at the end of the discussion, is education. It was critical to our superintendent and to our local superintendents that there was a continuity of learning, a continuum of teaching and learning that did not stop as schools closed, but instead included remote learning. And for our special education students, to the greatest extent possible, we continued to reflect and respond to their IEP. So the change here was definitely in our service delivery model, and it was also given as options to our local superintendents for how they would control and provide instruction to all students, including students with disabilities. I just want to give a heartfelt understanding and recognize that this has been a particularly stressful time for our families, especially as we navigate new and different ways of educating children while contending with our typical responsibilities amidst life during the pandemic. And I know there are additional stressors when you are the parent of a child with a disability. We hear you, and I want to acknowledge and show my appreciation for the enhanced role that many of you have played during this distance learning process. It has been difficult, I know, for many families, our students, and our teachers. Despite changes to our educational service delivery model, now we're in home versus in a school building, our focus and efforts have remained steadfast to create a state-local system, as you see, one that's based on communication, collaboration, and support to ensure that our students with disabilities continue to receive the word that we all know, FAPE, a free, appropriate public education. As the state education agency, MSD serves as a vehicle to establish policy and accountability for our local school systems and public agencies, to provide support and technical assistance, issue all the federal and state funding that supports our students with disabilities, as well, and probably paramount, is to provide family support and dispute resolution for our students with disabilities and their families. Our strategic plan that you see pulsing on the left was established in 2016, and it continues to be the driver and is actually accelerated or elevated during this time with the focus to narrow the gaps for our students with disabilities. Our work focuses on early childhood because we know the earlier the better. Secondary transition that Michelle and I are so closely working together on to prepare our students for those years beyond high school. And then access, equity, and progress, where access produces an outcome. Equity allows our students to have meaningful, purposeful engagement, and progress means narrowing the gap, which means progress is not enough, that we need accelerated progress for our students. One of the most powerful drivers that you see in the strategies around the ring is family partnerships. In fact, research has told us and has shown us that the positive relationship between a family and a school community is the #1 predictor of a child's school success. We need you, and we are partners in this work with you. In response to this COVID-19 pandemic, our team has elevated, as you see, our support to local school systems and our families. I'm not going to run through the list on your right, but from day one, we began weekly state and local leadership meetings where all federal and state updates were provided. We continue to have those every Thursday afternoon. We hold weekly regionalized, we have divided the state into 5 regions. Each region meets with an expert team here at the State Department to receive technical assistance, professional development, and that's where our local systems network and share the successes, their challenges, and lessons learned in this time so that we are all supporting and working together. And last but not least, we have created, and we will share all of these documents with you and access for you to locate them. We've developed a comprehensive library of resources and tools, from technical assistance bulletins around the continuity of learning, and now moving forward in recovery efforts. And then of course, a parent's guide to help navigate this work. And then we know that the social and emotional health and the behavioral concerns of our students as we reopen and begin recovery efforts will be a focus for all of us. So we created a guide to help us with that. In partnership with the local school systems and during this period of school closure and reopening, it's important for you to know that as a family, the expectations for the provisions of special education have not changed. I was thrilled to see Leslie Margolis with us today. I'm sure she will bring home the legal lens to this work, and there is no question. There are no waivers, there are no changes. The provision of FAPE, the provision of special education has not changed. And in fact, our educational law IDA has provided us with clear direction for our continued efforts and our guidance. A continuum you'll see here in front of you of teaching and learning was always the expectation of MSD and our local superintendents. We did not see the closure of school as a break in teaching and learning or instruction. With 2 drivers, the health and safety of teachers, service providers, and students, so health and safety was paramount. The other driver was we were in a new learning environment, and that was home with a virtual and or distance learning. So as we tackle this, you will see that green represents general education and blue represents special education for students with disabilities. So each local school system was required from day one, starting at March 16th when schools closed. Dr. Williams began to create his school system's continuity of learning plan. Partner to that, and in addition, a plus factor for our students with disabilities was that they have existing and continue to have current IEPs, right? So we talked about those individualized continuity of learning plans. They really are our review and our look of how the student's IEP is going to be implemented at home. and how we could prevent student regression and promote learning during this time. So for this and to support our locals and to be partners in this work, we created this flow chart. It's a thought process designed as a tool for our IEP teams and our school staff as a decision-making process in developing the individualized continuity learning plans for our students with disabilities. Each individualized continuity of learning plan for a student with disability, it was determined whether each student's IEP could be implemented as written in a virtual environment, like perhaps a student with a speech and language IEP with speech and language services. That IEP could be implemented as written because it was going to be done remotely and through teletherapy. The other option was to amend an IEP with parent agreement that would be a supplement to the student's current IEP. That pre-pandemic IEP never went away. We continue to be focused on the goals, the objectives, and the needs of that individual child, whether we're in a schoolhouse or out of a schoolhouse. And then finally, if we do not have parent agreement to amend, we would enter the formal IEP process and revise an IEP, the current IEP. Please know that this process was all the way through March 16th as we began the planning when schools introduced their continuity of learning plans on the 26th or the 30th was a Monday, and then all the way through the remainder of the school year. So as Maryland now moves into recovery planning, we're going down that continuum line of teaching and learning. As Maryland goes in and enters recovery planning, each local school system, again, has been given a task to support the local recovery. So again, each local school system has the autonomy to determine how and when their district will reopen. It is based on their community. It is based on their stakeholder recovery group feedback that has been established for them to see the best for their community. And also, Dr. Salmon has made equity plans. Every local school system has a current equity plan, and that in their recovery plan, it is also requested that each local school system include their equity plans. As we continue to look at this, you'll see the picture on the left. The state of Maryland, the MSDE, has also written a recovery plan for education. Our local recovery plans will mirror and work in collaboration with the state plan. Included in the guidance is for our local school systems is to identify those gaps of the populations of gaps, the learning gaps, and then to identify a path for success and recovery using the Maryland College and Career Ready standards. And then most importantly, when our students are missing, that engagement piece and that student attendance piece is critical, that we are tracking those systems at each local level to ensure that teaching and learning is occurring. So this completes, as you see us moving down this arrow, and in our story, schools closed. We had a continuity of learning plan for general ed and for our individual students with IEPs. Now in recovery efforts, we just discussed, each local school system is creating a recovery plan. And in addition to the local recovery plan that you see here in green, again, we have a plus factor for students with disabilities. And that plus factor is how we are going to address the need for, and if appropriate, compensatory education and recovery services. Again, all of this planning for reopening, all of the next steps for our work is based on the health and safety of our students and the staff providing instruction, as well as looking at the change in service delivery methods. So we have options now, right? As our schools reopen, will they reopen face-to-face on a variety of different schedules and entering in? Will they stay at virtual? Will they have a blended model? Days on, days off of blended and face-to-face? Whatever that may be, that is something that is our locals' decision making, and we will support them in that work. And I know Dr. Williams will be sharing the Baltimore County options today for this fall. So again, just like we created that flow chart to help our IEP teams, our families through the process for continuity of learning, we again created a second decision-making process tool to assist in the review and the identification of the impact for distance learning. Was there regression? Were services not delivered? Are there new concerns? And any growth that may have occurred through remote learning as we begin those recovery efforts. I'm not going to review this entire graphic, but I want to highlight, please know all local school systems were provided with PD and training and support and ongoing support to unpack this work in the best interest of our students and families. I want to highlight two key pieces to recovery for students with disabilities contained in this chart, as you'll see highlighted in the middle. I know this is what many parents worry about the most. How will my child with a disability recover from such an extended school closure? First, just as when the school system service delivery model changed to a complete virtual learning platform and the student's IEP had to be reviewed, then changed as appropriate, the same process happens again as our service delivery model changes during the reopening or partial reopenings or whatever that local school system is opening their doors. Local school systems will review the student's IEP to ensure it can be implemented as written or changed if necessary. Also, when locals are reviewing the student's IEP, they will need to consider whether the student has any new or additional needs related to the pandemic and school closures. Second, and very important, locals will determine whether a child may need what we are calling compensatory education or recovery services. These services are intended to help remediate the loss of FAPE that a student with an IEP may have experienced during the extended school closure. We understand that there may have been services, modifications, and accommodations that a child needed as part of their education program, but due to the health and safety concerns presented during the pandemic, those services, modifications, and accommodations could not be delivered. Local school systems will look at these instances to determine if compensatory education or recovery services are necessary, and if so, what kind. And our parents are critical in this planning and this review process. So to wrap up this continuum of teaching and learning throughout this process, and you'll see this red oval, that is probably the most critical piece in providing FAPE and continuing to move forward. And that's that recursive process. This is not an in, out, done deal, not a follow-up. It is one that creates ongoing activities in order to inform our steps to support our children and our families. It is, and you are, all of you are a key part of this work. Number one, ongoing monitoring of student progress. We need to know what that progress looks like and how we're moving forward. Documenting that progress and services and supports will help us as we reopen and move into the next delivery model.
Thank you so much, Marcella. I would like to make sure, just in the interest of time, that we have enough time for questions. So,
Okay.
so if you want to summarize, we can definitely come back to some of this.
No problem. I'm wrapping up. So in key to this is our work to make sure that communication is key. We always know sometimes there may be challenges and there may be concerns or disagreements that may arise. So we have put together here some options. We believe that most disagreements and disputes hopefully can be resolved informally. So we have local school systems with family support units, as well as here at the division, and then progressing through, you can file a state complaint, request mediation, or file for a due process. But we just want you to know that you are not alone. Some parent tips are listed here on your right, and it's part of our guide to communicate with your case manager. Share the concerns, fears, and suggestions we have, and ask any questions about your options. And finally, here is our list. At the bottom, there's the Maryland Learning links, and we will surely have that for your review. So to conclude, please let me recognize the power in this town hall to make a difference in the life of a child. The Baltimore County leaders here, our teachers, advocates, community stakeholders, legislators, thank you, Delegate Ebersol, and our parents. And to parents, thank you again for all you have and continue to do to support your child's teachers and your schools. Together, we have faced very big challenges, but our resilience as a community will be the best for our students and our families. So thank you. And thank you for having me, Michelle.
Thank you so much for that. That's a lot of information. We'll make sure that everybody does have, we're going to post this on our website and our Facebook as well, but you can find it on MSDE. And I am going to go straight to Dr. Williams because I know he's short on time and I so appreciate that he's here. And I did ask him not to talk only about special education, but also about racial equity and some of the issues that our children in poverty are dealing with. And Rachel White will address that more later, particularly sort of a response from BCPS to some of the racial tensions that we're seeing in our area right now and across the country. So I hope you'll throw that in too. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams.
So first, good evening, everyone. I just want to thank Delegate Guyton and hello, Delegate Eversole, for bringing us together to discuss racial equity. I would also like to thank Dr. Mary McComas, Dr. Melissa Whitstead, and Dr. Raquel Jones for joining me this evening. I was just so intrigued with the report from MSDE. So thank you, Marcella. It's always good to see you. So I'm gonna jump right in. My team will be following after me, but last August, I called the community's attention to our achievement gap, which is primarily based on race and has persisted over many years as people across the country are coming together to support Black Lives Matter. This is a critical moment to examine inequities, including the impact of race and racism in education. And so as a Black father and educator for I will say almost 32 years, I'm proud of the work Baltimore County Public Schools has done to establish one of a few school board policies in the nation about equity. Our staff have been training for racial equity leadership from even the cabinet level. That's this level with my chiefs to our school-based teams. We have examined our policies and practices to identify and remove barriers to opportunities, access and opportunities for all students. But as you know, this pandemic has exacerbated health, economic, and educational gaps. Our students' experiences during the closure are influenced by not only the stress and trauma of illness, but also work responsibilities for many of our students and families, job losses, and access to everything from school supplies to devices and internet. From the beginning of the closure, we had prioritized social emotional learning in order to support students during this crisis. To the extent that our students of color are overrepresented among both students living in poverty and students served by education, we have provided devices and hotspots to students at Title I schools and to English learners. Moving forward, our design team for the reopening plan has set guidelines that include providing additional resources and supports based on student needs. In addition to the community survey that is now available for your feedback about next school year, our outreach has specifically targeted parents and community leaders who represent families of color and students with special needs. So our focus on equity means advocating for tools to close these achievement gaps and provide access to resources for all students. We will also continue to have direct and honest conversations about institutional racism and practices in Baltimore County Public Schools and how we can break down these barriers that have existed far too long. So we're offering resources on our website to support a safe environment for students, families, and staff to understand and discuss tough issues. And I continue to lead conversations about race for our school and office leaders. And I'm so proud about this next step. We are looking a part of Team BCPS, that we will have a date for an online conversation about race and racism. And that will be July 8th at 4 p.m. And so we really need to have the conversations We're working a part of an educational institution. We always think about the learning and how do we as adults learn, and then how do we give voice to our students and families. Sometimes those students and families may not have a voice. So it does mean we'll be looking at our policies. It does mean we'll be looking at my rules, the superintendent rules. It also means we're going to look at how we staff and how we have opportunities for students, because again, they are our business to make sure we are preparing them for college and career readiness. I do want to turn this presentation over to Dr. McComas and Dr. Whitstead that will speak specifically around special ed in Baltimore County, parts of our recovery plan, some of the ideas, and just curriculum in itself that we really had to make a quick turn as a system. We had about 2 weeks to make some decisions, but the learning, I want to stress that learning that had taken place and the feedback we have received will help us if we have to do this again, which the word is we may end up doing this again, but more importantly, we know there's some students who have been disengaged, and we know they have been dealing with a lot of stress as well as staff. So returning back to normal is no such thing. We're going to be starting a different school year, and how we will start will more than likely look differently in the past. So I'll turn it over to Dr. McComas and Dr. Whitstead.
So good evening, and Delegate Guyton, thank you for having us. I hope my sound is a little better than it was earlier. Excellent. I will be very quick because I recognize our time is moving very quickly this evening. I would just like to build on what Dr. Williams said very quickly before I hand it over to Dr. Whitstead to share really a focus on special education during this time period. But before I do that, I just would like to say to everyone that in our extended closure this past spring, and certainly throughout the summer, and as we move into recovery into the fall, part of our guiding philosophy has been first compassion, to recognize that different families, different communities are impacted dramatically different by the COVID pandemic. And certainly the institutional racism and the immediate racial injustices that we've been seeing and witnessing. And so we need to recognize compassion needs to lead this work in every way, followed by flexibility and true attention to the individual and individual needs. And so that we really need to serve our children in a way that comes first to understand who they are, the needs that they have, and the resources that we can drive to support them in every way. On that, I'm going to, at this point, in light of time, hand it over to Dr. Whitstead. She is our Executive Director of Academic Supports, and she helps shepherd and lead our special education services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and Dr. Williams. As Marcella so eloquently shared, we in Baltimore County Public Schools are falling right in line with the recommendations from MSDE. We had all of our special educators or related service providers contact families to create amendments to the IEP in order to reflect the remote learning context. IEP team meetings still were held as appropriate, and if families were in disagreement with those amendments, we held IEP teams in that instance to document their disagreement. Special educators, related service providers, and instructional assistants continue to provide services for students during the extended closure, and it was the role of the school administrator in each building to monitor instruction at that time. Assessments were not completed formally during the closure, but we are exploring a way to virtually do assessments as well as safely bring students in to do formal assessments. It's something we're working with our health department on right now to see if that's a possibility for face-to-face. A comment came up about IEP goals related to behavior, and yes, we addressed that during the extended closure as well. Many schools used their special educators to address those goals or had the staff coach parents and work through that behavior intervention plan if it was something that was occurring at the house. We also offered parent workshops during the closure through our Parent Resource Center. We also had weekly parent resource flyers that we gave to schools to distribute home, as well as posted on our website. We are very proud of the fact that we logged all the encounters we had with special educators and related service providers with our students who are on IEPs. We have an electronic system called our student planning system where all of our documents are housed, and we were able to log 236,963 encounters during the extended closure, and we have about 16,000 students on IEPs. So we're very proud of that point. For extended school year, we are providing that virtually, and it will be during July. That's the targeted program. We also have a universal program for all students happening in BCPS, and they can participate in that on their own schedule. It starts in June and concludes in August, but the extended school year plans, which are virtual only, will be live instruction. If you participated during the school year in the IEP team where you determined extended school year would be provided this summer, that's where it was determined the amount of time and what service would be provided, and that will still happen virtually. So you should be hearing from your child's home school. The special educator or related service provider at each home school is who is offering the extended school year services this summer. And I know there were comments about social emotional support, and we agree it is critical to support students in the current events related to the global pandemic, as well as the racism. So we were providing a connection and a safe space for students. We offered elementary and for secondary students different calendars that had daily activities to support social emotional learning for students. If there was a concern about a student, we had the teacher contact the school counselor, who in turn reached out to different students and supported them. They either joined class meetings and monitored things, or they had individual sessions with them. We also continued our attendance procedures during the extended closure. That was making sure that students were accounted for, they were engaged in the remote learning that was happening. We did this through virtual meetings, phone, email, text, and contact with the family. We had a pretty advanced way to monitor student engagement to ensure that all students were safe and accounted for during the remote learning. The teacher of record, who was most in contact with the student and families, would attempt to contact them through the virtual meeting, phone, email, text, or contact. And if they were unable to, there was a school-based liaison at every building. And then they made a second attempt to contact and get a full understanding of the student's needs. If that was still unsuccessful, it was referred to our pupil personnel worker, who then held a meeting with all of the people who are typically involved with the child. And then they attempted to determine what other supports were needed to engage the students. Our pupil personnel workers, safety managers, and school resource officers also did wellness checks to check on those families that were not engaged. Also know that all of our related service providers, the school nurses, school psychologists, school social workers, pupil personnel workers, safety managers, were all supportive of the school-based teams as far as being able to monitor and support students in their social emotional needs. And finally, that Division of School Climate and Safety is in the process of conducting different focus groups around the stakeholders to understand what other supports may be needed for the summer as well as in the fall. And finally, we are beginning our re-entry planning, and we are also holding different focus groups for stakeholders, as well as a survey which was launched yesterday to collect data and understand the different opinions of the groups so we could make better decisions as far as giving suggestions to Dr. Williams and his cabinet team. So those 3 scenarios include continuing a revised version of our remote learning. We certainly have lessons learned through students, teachers, parents, and other stakeholders where we would revise the remote learning experience that we did this fall. Another scenario would be to the combination of in-person and remote learning, and finally being able to reopen schools with 100% in-person learning, knowing that we may have some protocols that will look different and different ways we need to monitor and keep kids safe. So with that, we are on the Baltimore County side are ready for questions.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate all the information you provided. You answered between you and Marcella, Franczkowski, and Dr. Williams, you did answer a lot of the questions that are on my list. So we'll try to move forward. Before Dr. Williams leaves, though, I want to try and direct a few that I know would be particular to him, I think. Now, you knew this one was going to come, Dr. Williams. So I did, working with students in our area, past students, teachers and parents in North Baltimore County, I did make a request to you and to the department and also to the board that hate symbols such as Confederate flags, swastikas, other hate symbols be banned in Baltimore County Public Schools. I know nothing has been resolved with that yet, but I know that we also have some of those students listening right now who have put out a petition of more than 1,000 past students from one particular high school where this is an issue. And we'd like to hear what you have to say about how that might promote equity in Baltimore County.
So yes, I know that there was emails and letters that were sent to me and probably the board members. And I know this is our topic of discussion, one at the policy level, but also at the rule level. You know, currently we have our code of conduct. We have our rule regarding bullying, intimidation, and harassment. And so, you know, we're starting with the town hall meeting, but I know there's a lot of work to be done to look at each one of these issues that seems to be happening, maybe in pockets of our county, or maybe it's widespread. And so that voice is important. I don't have a current timeline, but I just want to acknowledge we have received it. We are talking about what those next steps may be. The board is looking at it through their lens with the Policy Review Committee, and we have a newly formed committee, the Equity Committee, at the board level, and then the work that we have to do here in terms of the operations. I think there's several things we have to look at that our students are voicing their opinions, so we can really look at how best to resolve this. It's a little challenging in the remote learning stage, but because we can't, I'm such a person to be involved with kids and face-to-face, but I think it was very telling with Omar and his work as the student member of the board and his involvement with helping us looking at our policies, rules. And I will also just put a shout out that I'm pleased that I was able to share with the board our new strategic plan. And a lot of that is to speak to the work that we're going to do. Again, access and opportunity, but one big focus area, and again, we have to build this out, but one focus area is a safe and supportive environment for all. And that encompasses not only our students, but also our staff, also our parents coming to schools and visiting. So just stay tuned. we got a lot of work to do. My staff sometimes have to slow me down because I'm trying to solve everything within a year. This is like a big ship. Marcella knows in turning this, it takes some time. But we look forward to this work. This is going to be hard work, and we may not have all the answers, but we have to at least listen and give that opportunity for our students and community.
All right. Well, thank you so much for responding to that. I appreciate your concerns about a supportive environment in schools, because some of those issues really do affect how well not just our children of color perform, but also our more sensitive children who are white and are really discouraged by seeing that from their peers. So hopefully we'll continue that conversation, but I appreciate it. I do have a couple of other questions. You spoke to a few of these. I have a question about the invisible students, the ones that I know we just sort of got a rundown of how they were tracked down by PPEs and everyone checked in. How do we have a number or a percentage of those kids that we did not contact, that we don't know if they're okay? Or are we talking about 100% tracking of those children who haven't appeared in class or turned in any homework since this began?
So we have been monitoring the engagement data. Students who have access to technology, students who don't have access. So I just have to say this, although we look at the aggregate, the large numbers, we're now shifting to where our students are, what schools, so we can even name who our students are. I'm concerned about the students who have been disengaged. I'm also concerned about students who are making level changes. As you well know, making a change from elementary to middle and middle to high is another transitional period for students and families. And then the students who barely pass. So we got big groups to look at. So it's those kids who have been disengaged, those kids who have been engaged, we're making transition stages in career, educational career. And then those students who may have been struggling prior to the pandemic, where our PPWs and social workers have been in contact. So again, I mentioned it earlier, opening of school cannot look like what we've done previously, knowing all of these factors that we have to consider.
Sure. So, and I'm guessing maybe you don't have the information in front of you as far as the percentage that we're actually missing. And maybe that's something for Dr. McComas or someone else on your team. So I'll follow up with that. Now, the questions I'm asking now are actually from our constituents and not directly. The first one was mine about the Confederate flag, but the rest are from our constituents. So there's a lot of concern, particularly from special education parents, about trying to understand why their services, particularly given that Marcella Franczkowski just talked about how a free and appropriate public education is still supposed to be honored during a shutdown. Why the services were so dramatically cut back for students who are receiving particularly related services when the teachers and those counselors and aides were still being paid by the system. Again, this is a question I have from probably half of my special education parents right now, that they're very concerned that free and appropriate public education and those IEP goals were not being met because they were going down to a fifth of what they had in their IEP or even less for related services during this shutdown. So that's one of our big questions. So hopefully someone can address that a little bit. And what to expect moving forward. Like, do we expect that to change and improve, or should we expect that going forward?
Well, I'll start and then I'll pitch it to either Dr. McComas or Dr. Wisted. The difference that I've been saying since the closure, this was not a snow day where we close and we can then reopen a couple of days later or have an action plan. What we found, our staff was impacted. And that was another challenge, that whatever plan we put forth, we also had to think about the staff members to implement the plan. And many staff members had their own challenges, whether it was daycare, whether it was access. You know, when the stay-at-home order was issued, that caused us to change our plans. What we were thinking about doing, we had to rethink because there was a little bit of uncertainty from our staff about their own well-being. And then the fact that we had staff impacted with COVID-19. So I just want to set that up, that this closure was nothing like anything that we had prepared for or planned for. And our staff was impacted as well. But I'm gonna tee it up to Mary or Melissa to finish.
Sure, this is Melissa. I can respond to that. I want to share that it certainly was not the recommendation from the Office of Special Education when we did training with our related service providers or our special educators to not offer service. If anything, it was the opposite. You know, when we first started early in the middle of March, when we were planning for that early April entry, you know, our general educators were providing recorded sessions and not doing as much live interaction, but it was the special educators that were providing live sessions and those related service providers. You know, and then as we morphed and realized, okay, this is going to go on longer, and general education was doing more live sessions, it would have been up to the special educator or related service provider to then go back to the family and re-amend the amended IEP. And I believe in some cases, more service was provided over time. If a family was in disagreement with the amount of service that was being provided, again, we held those IEP team meetings, we documented that. There were certainly times when people shifted and then said, okay, maybe I could work out the schedule, because remember, initially people felt as though, oh, I have to just do it one-on-one. And typically I might have a session of 3 kids as a related, let's say speech as an example. I would typically have 3 students together. I can't get all 3 of those students together virtually at the same time. So if I have to do it separately, I obviously, you know, can't duplicate myself in 3 ways. So they may have had to reduce service in that example. If families were okay with all 3 kids still being together and they could all make that schedule work, you know, we just had to be flexible, because the way they were doing it live became harder to do if they had to individually do all of those services separately. So that's just an example.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think an important part of tonight, we will not get through all of this, but an important part of this is for parents and families to hear directly from the school systems, both at the state and the county level, sort of what the intent is and what the plan is moving forward, even if they've been unhappy with some of the decisions that have been made in the past. So I want to keep focused on that as well. We have a ton of questions about how kids will be, I'm going to throw them at you, and then we're going to move on to our next speaker and come back to questions at the end in the interest of time. But how kids will be reassessed when they come back to school, how progress is going to be determined given that they've missed so much time. We have questions about how students with one-on-one assistance are going to be able to social distance in the classroom. And then I also just got one that is intriguing. So there are a lot of our students without internet access who have special needs, and they can't access, for that reason, instruction at this time. But there are others who have disabilities that don't allow them to access online, or their parents are not able to actually do the parent homeschooling that we're asking them to do right now. So I think if there's one last question for this team, including Marcella, it would be, what is the best way that you all can support parents and kids kind of getting through this difficult time, particularly when parents are not the ones that are trained to do this work, but they feel like they're having to do it on top of everything else. And then also the piece about the kids that just aren't reachable because of no internet or because they're unable to do it that way. How are we reaching those? So we'll stop this portion on that question. And I don't know if Marcella Franczkowski wants to tackle it, or someone from BCPS.
Sure, I'll begin, Michelle, not a problem. First, I want to reflect that Baltimore County has done a nice job. We've had some flexibility given to us through Maryland Department of Health, and that was that we could use teletherapy for providing OT, PT, and speech and language. This is new flexibility that occurred a couple weeks ago, Michelle, that we could not before through IEP and IFSP. So we felt, and our superintendents, they received that flexibility and they were able to access. So we have seen an increase across the state as well as in Baltimore County for having other options and flexibility to provide. Because licensures for speech, language, OT, and PT, they were not allowed to provide teletherapy. So that added the certification and the allowability allowed that. So we have seen an increase in the delivery of related services. So kudos to that. As far as our students not engaged and those that are challenging in this work, we know that there are going to be challenges, and we started from day one in our flow chart, and you'll see it in there, that having conversations with families, because there's needs from families also, right? Those families may need to be coached or trained in the use of technology where they did not use before. They may need to be coached or supported in remediating or following up in an assignment. It is never the sole intent and will never be the intent that they are the teacher. You know, I've received a lot of feedback about that from families. Like, you know, I'm their mother, I'm their father, I'm not their teacher. And we totally understand that. The key is that we are able to support, to coach our families, see the needs of families too, whether that be technology, whether that be training, whether that be coaching in supporting a skill. So we have seen this as a partnership, a collaboration, that communication between families and the implementation of services is critical. As you know, it's the #1 predictor of success. So we have tried to work around family schedules too, because as Dr. Williams has said, you have the students, you have the teachers, you have the families. So all those pieces need to come together to create that maximum or exemplary model.
Yeah. Marcella, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm so scared we're going to run out of time.
I'm good.
Question actually for you, because I know we spoke about this on the phone.
Okay.
How can we be sure, who is monitoring that our kids are actually getting these services that they deserve, that are in their IEP? And I'm not necessarily just talking about BCPS here, because I know we have people on this from all over the state.
Okay.
If an LEA is not following the IEP, what is the state doing about that?
So that is part of our monitoring process. We are accountable for the delivery of services. The local is the first check. And then as we come in, comprehensive monitoring, we will be reviewing IEPs, the implementation of either the IEP is written, the amended IEP, or the revised IEP for 19. So as Dr. Williams has said, all systems and protocols are changing in a shift, right, for this work. So our monitoring protocol will shift, and we will be looking at the pre-pandemic IEP, the IEP implemented during extended school closures, and that recovery piece. As well as a true indicator will be the recovery and the compensatory awards, right? As we look at local school systems and as the IEP teams approach those services or those accommodations or modifications that were not provided, that data point will be very obvious through their recovery and through the compensatory awards.
Okay, thank you. So, and just so everybody understands that language, basically we're talking about money to the school systems, right? That's how the state can sort of monitor and encourage that sort of.
Well, Michelle, we actually have access at the State Department for IEPs. So we'll be monitoring, besides money, we will actually monitoring the delivery of services, be able to see through the exact IEP for each individual child.
Yeah.
So programmatic that we're monitoring.
Thank you. Well, those IEPs are in good hands, so I know you'll have a lot of work. So thank you for answering these questions. I do want to move on so that Rachel White and Leslie Margolis have a little bit of time to talk as well. And I think we're going to go over by a minute or two or 5. But I'd like to introduce first Leslie Margolis, who is from Disability Rights Maryland. And Leslie's a managing attorney with that organization. which is a nonprofit serving those with disabilities in Maryland. And she has just been a terrific help and partner for me in the General Assembly, and does a lot of advocacy work and testimony on bills that affect the disability community. So she's here to talk to all of us, as parents and supporters about how we can get more resources during this time. So I'll hand it over to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Delegate Guyton, for that lovely introduction. And thank you for inviting me to be here. And also thank you, Delegate Ebersol, for being here. I just want to say there is a lot of thunder and lightning, and I live in the city with Comcast, so I'm really just hoping that I can make it through with my internet connection. And if I disappear, I will call back with my phone. So as we think about the past several months and the upcoming months, there are several big categories of issues that I think about. But overall, I see equity as needing to be at the heart of every plan and every decision that's made. I want to borrow from one of my colleagues on the stakeholder group the state convened to talk about recovery, because she says the guiding question for every aspect of planning should be, will this make things better for all students? And I think that equity really comes into play at every aspect of determining how to serve students via distance learning, and also how to determine how to return students to school. So for students with disabilities, this means thinking about health and safety. It means thinking about instruction and related services, and it means thinking about non-academic and other activities with particular care to ensure that students with all types of disabilities are given the opportunity to, that non-disabled kids have, and that their needs are met, and that all students, including those who need one-to-one assistance for personal care, for accessing and participating in the curriculum, are considered as schools begin this very challenging process of figuring out how to reopen or to continue distance learning or do some kind of hybrid program. So in these big categories of issues, that first big category that I want to talk about are the issues related to health and safety. So we had stay-at-home orders, and we might have them again in the future. To think about what that means for families who have children with disabilities. You have to think about the conditions under which students and staff return to school and what that looks like in terms of masks, in terms of hand washing and distancing, and think about those students who, because of their disabilities, cannot wear masks. Those students who need one-to-one personal assistance. Those students with disabilities whose only contact with non-disabled peers has traditionally been in lunch, in recess, and assemblies, and the specials, music, art, PE. Those activities that very likely when school resumes are going to look very different and will likely be very curtailed. So how will those students continue to have that social interaction with their non-disabled peers? Those kinds of considerations are key, and those are part of what needs to come into play when you're thinking about equity. There have to be provisions for staff and for students who become ill when they're at school, and maintaining confidentiality is really key. So it's going to be important to track contacts, but it's also going to be important to maintain confidentiality. And that's particularly an issue if you're talking about a very small self-contained classroom with 5 kids in it. So those kinds of considerations. We know there are basic safety protocols that have to be in place. You're going to have to follow the CDC guidelines. You're going to have to follow whatever the state Department of Health, the local Department of Health puts out. But within those parameters, equity considerations have to be considered. The second big category that I want to talk about are the issues that are related to instruction and related services. So the issue of how special education and related services have been provided during distance learning and how they will be provided both during the summer for extended school year services and in the fall as school resumes. We know, regardless of what has been said by school officials, that many of the continuity of the distance learning plans did not meet the requirements of that were set out in the State Department of Education guidance. They did not meet the requirements of the law. We ourselves saw many plans that identified only 1 or 2 goals. You know, they pick one goal, one objective, and that was the distance learning plan. We saw related services that were, 15 minutes every other week, rather than the direct services that were on the IEPs. So compliance and appropriateness issues. And we're seeing that as extended school year services plans are being developed, that families are being told, this is the ESY program. It begins on July whatever, it ends on July whatever. It's a 2.5-hour program. This is what you get. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. ESY is supposed to be individually designed. It is supposed to meet the needs of the child, to enable the child to maintain skills and be able to make progress during the upcoming school year. So this one size fits all, hand a program to a family and say this is it, is not okay. And so families have recourse, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But that is another compliance and appropriateness issue. We know that there are some students who made progress actually at home. Some kids, it's very stressful to be in school, and they actually did better being at home. But a lot of kids did lose ground, and a lot of them regressed, and they're going to need new services or different services when school resumes. So that's a separate issue itself. And then we know, as has been referenced, that there are students who still don't have access to the internet or access to devices, or who are not able, because of their disabilities, to use devices effectively. We know that there are many students, again, because of their disabilities, who are unable to benefit from distance learning, and that is an equity issue. We know that there are students who are unable to benefit from distance learning because their parents are essential employees, or they're otherwise unable to support their children, even if there is training or support or coaching, and that's an equity issue. We know that there are transition age students who have not been able to get that kind of job site programming that they typically would get. There's been a lack of training for parents about how to monitor their children's progress, how to support their children during distance learning. And there also have been language barriers for families whose first language is not English. So lots of those issues. And then also there are issues related to logistics and non-academic and other school activities. So thinking about things like transportation and whether all kids go by school bus or public transportation or some other means of transport to and from school, and what that will look like for kids for whom that may not be a safe option. Also the issue of discipline, right? So there are kids who are in the middle of the discipline process when schools shut down. We would argue that they should be back in school, and that it is not appropriate to continue wherever they were in the discipline process and keep them out of school when it resumes. But those issues need to get sorted out. And then also making sure that kids are not disciplined if they can't keep a mask on or they can't comply with social distancing because of their disabilities. So how can we move forward, and what recourse do parents have, or what options do parents have? So overall, there are several steps. First of all, I would say, don't be afraid to ask for an IEP meeting. We've talked to a lot of parents who feel, in the sense that we get is that parents feel resigned to what they've been given, that they've gotten the distance learning plan, or they've gotten the extended school year services plan, and the feeling is, this is, I guess this is all we're going to get, and I can't really do anything about it. And that's not true. And I think you've heard even from the Baltimore County folks, you can ask for an IEP meeting. You can discuss the plan that you've been given. You have a right to negotiate this and ask for what you think is appropriate for your child. If you need accommodations to participate in a virtual meeting, you should ask for those accommodations. You have the right to participate in your child's meetings. I would also say pay attention to how your child is doing. If you have not already done so, start taking notes. What was your child doing in March when schools closed? And what's your child doing now? Has there been regression? You can keep a journal or just jot down notes every few days, or take videos if your child has behavior issues and is now having tantrums every day. keep a record of that, because that's information that will be important as you come to the table to talk about whether there are additional or different services that will need to be provided. It's what Marcella Franczkowski was talking about the compensatory or makeup services or different services. Also, if you have a concern about extended school year services, you can ask for an IEP meeting, and you can request more or different services. The steps that you can take as the school year begins, as you're planning for that school year beginning. So think about, if schools open, is it safe for your child to go back to school based on your child's disabilities? And if so, what needs to happen before school starts? What would need to be in place for your child to be able to be at school? Is it safe to ride the bus? And if not, is there another way of getting to and from school? If there's a hybrid program, what needs to be in place to make that program work effectively for your child? You can request an IEP meeting to revise the IEP, to add any additional services, any supports, any interventions that might be needed to facilitate your child's return. So for example, if your child has trouble with transitions and now has been at home with you for all these months, is it going to be really difficult to make that transition back into a school setting? Would social stories help? Would counseling help? Would maybe coming to the school when it's empty and seeing the classrooms or meeting the teacher that your child will have, or those kinds of things, things that would be helpful, put them in place. You can do that through the IEP process. And again, coming back to, if your child is typically included in activities that are likely not to be happening, it's important for the team to think about how else, or if learning is going to be virtual, how else can your child get that contact with non-disabled peers? So think about also, if schools reopen and it's not safe for your child to attend, what should education for your child look like? I think we can all agree that distance learning over the past few months was really not intended to be a very long-term process, and that the distance learning plans are going to have to be a lot more robust than they've been. But they also maybe don't have to be completely virtual. So would it be safe for a staff person to come to your house and to provide home teaching? If the schools reopen, but it's not safe for your child to go to school, you will need medical documentation. So it's a conversation to have with your child's doctor. Maybe it's not safe to be in a big school setting, but it might be safe to be in another setting where there aren't lots of other people around. So those kinds of conversations will be important to have with your child's physician. And then again, ask for an IEP meeting and make the revisions that are needed to design a program that will be appropriate for your child. If schools remain closed, or your child's going to be completely on distance learning, think about what revisions need to be made to that plan to add more services or different services. How's your child done since March? What progress data has the school collected? If it has it collected data? What does that progress data show? What information do you have about how your child has done? Is digital access sufficient? What needs to change to make sure that your child is getting appropriate services? Because the bottom line is your child is entitled to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, which is very difficult. The least restrictive environment piece when you're talking about distance learning, but there are ways of facilitating inclusion with non-disabled peers, and that still needs to happen, and that's an equity issue. So remember, you can ask for assessments if you think your child needs to be reassessed. You can ask for an IEP meeting at any time. You can exercise your procedural rights. You can file a complaint with the State Department of Education if there's been a violation of the law. You can ask for mediation. You can ask for a due process hearing if you disagree with what the school system is requesting. You can contact Disability Rights Maryland. I know Maureen Van Stone is on the phone. She is the director of Project HEAL. If your child is served by Kennedy Krieger, you can also use them for legal services. There are other advocacy organizations. Our intake workers can provide those referrals if necessary, but our organization provides free legal services, and you're always welcome to call us if you have questions or if you have an issue that you are not able to resolve. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You have been a great help. We've gotten wonderful reactions from parents. I think that we could have you for another couple of hours and we would still run out of time. So we do appreciate that so much. I'm going to ask you one question and then move on to Rachel. She's been so patient. And then perhaps if you are able, and I would say the same thing for our friends from Kennedy Career, to stick around a little bit longer. There may be more questions for both of you, but I do get to Rachel. So the question that I do have for you that's come from several people, and this is a legal issue. If a student was older and in the transition period and should be doing job training during this time and should be having coaches and that sort of thing, and they age out during this COVID shutdown or before they get back into school and can have those services, what do you think the remedies are for those parents? Is there any legal way to give them more time if they've lost 6 months, 8 months, a year of their transition period?
So we had that conversation with Marcella Franczkowski at our Education Coalition meeting, and I think there are a couple of ways of approaching this. One is to come back and look at that transition plan and look at even if a child is not in the school system anymore, there still can be an entitlement to those makeup or compensatory services. If we're not talking about a violation, but we are talking about services that if a child lost things, if a child went backwards, if a child didn't make the progress that he or she should have made, those services can be provided even after a student has left the school system. But if there are still transition goals and still work that and those services were not provided, I mean, I would argue for an extension of school, but whether it's provided as an extension or provided via makeup services, the student should get services to put them where they would have been had they in school.
Thank you so much. That's a question that many parents have had of older children. So thank you again. I'm going to move now to Rachel White, who has been so patient. Rachel works with Advocates for Children and Youth. She's the Child Welfare Policy Director there. And she's really a tireless advocate for children in crisis, particularly those in poverty, in foster care, or who are homeless. She's also worked on the creation of the Foster Care Bill of Rights and advocated for most of the foster care bills that I put forward this year. So I am very pleased to have you with us and thank you for waiting.
Thank you so much, Delegate Guyton, for inviting me and just all of your tireless advocacy on the issues as well. I definitely appreciate that. I'm just going to jump right in for the sake of time. And my presentation will be focused on youth affected by poverty and youth in the foster care system as well during this time. So extended school closures can have detrimental social and health consequences for children living in poverty and are likely to be, inequities are likely to be exacerbated because of this time as well. So first, school closures will exacerbate food insecurity. For many students living in poverty, schools are not only a place for learning, but also for eating healthy or eating at all. So research shows that school lunch is associated with improvements in academic performance, whereas food insecurity is associated with low educational attainment and substantial risk to the physical and mental well-being of youth. In addition to food insecurity, current school closures are also likely to widen the learning gap between children from lower income homes and from children from higher income homes, right? So children from low income households live in conditions that may make schooling difficult, specifically distance learning education. Online learning environments, as we know, usually require computers and a reliable internet connection. So children from lower income households are likely to struggle to complete homework and online courses due to various precarious housing situations on top of the ongoing pandemic, which is slated to lead to a severe economic recession. So Policymakers, school administrators, and other local officials thus face two challenges. First, the immediate nutrition of your students, and second, the learning needs of students living in poverty must continue to be addressed. The continuation of school-provided meals is essential in preventing widespread food insecurity, and teachers should also consider how to adapt their learning materials for students without access to the internet, a computer, or even a place to stay or live. Local and state legislators must prepare for the considerable challenges that await when the pandemic subsides. At the local level, an adequate response must include targeted education and material support for children from low-income households to begin to close the learning gap that is likely to have occurred. From a policy perspective, legislators should also consider providing regular income support for households with children during the impending economic crisis to prevent a deepening and broadening of child poverty. Not only does school closure exacerbate food insecurity and the learning gap, it also unveils the sharp decline in child abuse and neglect reporting, as school systems and school personnel account for 20% of reports. In the month of April, reporting in Maryland was down by 80% compared to April 2019. Risk factors for child abuse and neglect include parental stress, economic instability, housing insecurity, which are due to increase during this time. So we must all take an active role in monitoring child safety within our communities and have a more watchful eye on children if we suspect something is wrong. In doing so, it is imperative that we also check our own personal biases and not over-police Black families and varying parenting styles as a result of lacking cultural competency. I say this because in Maryland and in so many other jurisdictions, Black children are disproportionately represented in child abuse and neglect reporting and every other child welfare indicator once they enter the system. This is due to poverty, inadequate access to social supports, and also systemic racism. Youth in foster care have unique educational needs and concerns, and it is imperative that local school systems and local Department of Social Services engage in meaningful partnerships to, one, identify youth in foster care within your school systems, ascertain the number of youth who are in need of technological devices or internet, and continue to remain engaged with youth who are no longer attending school. I was happy to hear that Baltimore County Public Schools has adopted the practice of wellness visits to meet the needs of youth who have fallen off the radar and are no longer engaged in their studies. The same model can be replicated in other jurisdictions as well. So I want to take the time to also segue into available funding and services to support youth in foster care and those who are at risk for abuse and neglect. At the time, the public is demanding greater investment in our communities. However, the governor is proposing to cut state services by freezing positions. Child welfare work cannot be done without humans to do the work. A hiring freeze took place in 2001 to 2004 in Maryland that took the child welfare system years to recover from. In fact, in at least one county, twice as many children were removed because there were insufficient staff available to do prevention work. Not only was incalculable damage done to the children and families who otherwise would have not been disrupted, the state invested $4 million more on placements as an alternative to funding casework staff. So we must urge Governor Hogan to reconsider the hiring freeze for the Department of Human Services, their frontline staff, and those that support them. In Baltimore County specifically, there are already 10 foster care vacancies, and freezing these positions will trigger another disaster in the long run. We do have a long road ahead of us to recover from school closures and its lasting impacts, but with dedication, perseverance, and meaningful partnership, I do believe it can be done.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I do have some questions for you. Before I go into them, I want to just reiterate something that you just said, because one of the questions that I did send to you, I think ahead of time, had come from some social workers who were very concerned about cutting positions and pay cuts for those who were serving these at-risk youth. And you said we need to all urge Governor Hogan to reconsider these cuts. And so I'm going to publicly do that now. And I hope
Thank you.
Join me as well. Because I agree with you, there is still more disaster that might be averted if we make the right choices now and invest in the right things. So thank you so much for saying that. I want to go back to foster care, for instance. I know we have some foster parents on the line, and some of them sent questions into me. How is foster care placement going? Are you seeing a higher need for it? Is it harder to place kids during COVID-19? And are we still putting them in hospitals? I mean, that was something that, was really a challenging issue during the General Assembly session this year. And we hear that still continued even more so since the epidemic, since this pandemic. And then one other question about foster care, and you can kind of squish it all into one answer.
Okay.
Is we have foster parents who are wonderful foster parents and willing to take in kids, but even though we've talked as an office to Department of Health, we can't prioritize COVID testing for those kids before placement. Do you know anything about what's going on there in the foster care system?
Right. Okay. These are great questions.
There's a lot there.
Thank you. I would like to say that, one second. It has become harder to place kids in foster care placements because children are not being tested when they come into the system. Like, that has been an issue. People, due to safety reasons, want to make sure that all youth are tested before you're placed in housing or placed with a foster parent. And that is the same for when say youth who are older, who are in group homes, if they leave and then they want to come back to the facility, or they become AWOL, the facilities aren't accepting them either, because they don't know where you've been during the time that you left. And so we are seeing an uptick in hospital placements. So it's something we are working on as an advocacy organization, on how we can address that. How can we can create more placements, how we can advocate for more testing to be done. Because even currently in group homes where we do know that there are COVID positive youth, not even all the youth who have been around that youth are being tested. So it's definitely an issue that is alarming, and is continuing to happen. And there's definitely more advocacy that needs to be done around that area, for sure.
Thank you. I'm gonna, another one is, and we've discussed this as well, I'm very concerned about the children that we haven't seen since this COVID outbreak. And Dr. Williams understandably didn't necessarily have the answers for how many hadn't been followed up, but I'm hearing things from not only between counties, but also between schools in our county, that some schools have followed up and some have not. Do you have any idea how many children are actually missing out there since this?
Right. We don't have an idea. We've reached out to different school systems to see, like, what is your number, and trying to get like an average. And so different school systems have the number of youth who have engaged in efforts to try to contact youth who've fallen off the radar. They have that number, but not all school systems are doing that. So it's very difficult to ascertain. And then with respect to, like, the Department of Social Services or Human Services, if that child is not in foster care already, or not receiving like any sort of preventive interventions from the department, they have no idea what students are off the radar, are not engaged. It is very difficult to ascertain but you have to be deliberate and intentional about it. Like, every school system should be engaging in the same practice of conducting wellness visits for youth who have like fallen off, or they haven't been able to contact, to determine what's going on, what's happening. Do you need services? Are you okay? Is abuse and neglect happening? And so if that's done, that can provide a sort of collaboration and segue into the Department of Human Services to be able to provide services and reach more families. But again, with the hiring freeze and there being vacancies, that's another issue as well, on who can actually do the work.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions about other resources that are available to parents in poverty, particularly to help them manage the educational needs of their kids during this time. Can you address any of that? Can you tell us what's out there and what needs to be out there?
Right. There's definitely, in general, like, supportive services for families, regardless if you're in poverty or not. I would suggest contacting the family tree, which is a 1-800 number. I can try to find the number and try to drop it in the chat so people can have it, and they can connect you. You let them know. It's a 24-hour hotline. You call and let them know what issue you're experiencing, and then they connect you with resources and advocates who can, let's try to help you through that particular situation. I can get the number and drop it in the chat.
Thank you so much. We usually have that on fast dial as well, along with advocates and children and youth. So thank you so much for all of your help. Do we have anybody who has specific questions for Rachel that I haven't already covered? I still have 5 pages of things, but I think you've done a great job discussing most of the questions that I had ahead of time. So I'm checking chat to see if there are any others. It looks like we've covered a lot of it. Okay. So family tree is 1-800-243-7337. Just so you all 7337, 243-7337. And it is a fabulous organization. So thank you so much for that, Rachel. I know we're at the actual official end of our time and we're almost perfect time-wise, but I know that we haven't had all our questions answered. Open it up and to our friends from Kennedy Krieger for a moment and see if they want to just say a word or two about non-public schools and what they're providing to kids right now, and so what we can expect from that, because I know that there are parents on this call who have children in non-publics. If they're still there.
Thank you, Delegate Guyton. So I'm Brad Schlager. I'm the president and CEO of Kennedy Krieger, and our vice president of our school programs, Dr. Linda Myers, had to step off. But I'll just say that for the transition that came about because of school closures, we rapidly transitioned to a tele-education model. We were gratified that we had a lot of experience already in telehealth, and we were able to scale up rapidly to implement distance learning for our students. And the approach also required a detailed, individualized continuity of learning plan for each of our over 500 students to rapidly make adjustments for them as well. The plan for the summer is to continue with distance learning. We are monitoring the situation for transition to on-site for the fall. We are working in tandem with Baltimore City, which is where our primary school locations are. But we're really focused on making sure that the transition, oh, there's Dr. Myers, that our transition is safe for students, for staff, for everybody involved. And that includes everything from the transportation pieces all the way to the on-site services, related services, as well as care to make sure that all of the staff that are involved in on-site education are also safe as well. Dr. Myers, did you want to pick up on that?
Thank you. Sorry, I had a slight difficulty for a minute there, and I missed the beginning of what you were sharing, Dr. Schlager. I was going to touch on one thing that Leslie said earlier about safety and talking about so there are students who won't be able to wear masks for certain reasons, but there are other students who will not want to, and we're not going to want to get into behavioral struggles for that. So one of the things that we're going to layer in over summer school while we continue with the distance learning is some mask desensitization, specifically making sure that teachers and related service providers take a couple minutes out of every session to put on their mask so students could get used to seeing their staff members with masks on, and then having the students themselves practice putting masks on. So we're hoping, and then using, ABA principles of reinforcement to reinforce that behavior. So if they haven't been getting used to it yet, we're hoping to lay that foundation so that it doesn't become a behavioral struggle down the road for those that don't have medical reasons for not being able to wear masks, just to head off the behavioral complication of that particular piece of the safety component. I'm not sure what else, I'm sorry that Brad was talking about, but I hope we covered it.
Talked about sticking with distance learning for the summer, and then monitoring the situation with Baltimore City as we map our fall semester yet to be determined what it's going to look like, but working closely with stakeholders in Baltimore City.
Okay, I'm not quite sure how to frame this question. Sorry, I'm reading it on the other screen. How much of what you're doing at Kennedy is internally motivated and how much of it is because of guidelines by the state? One of the questions that I have is that, you know, they have concerns that they have a child at a non-public, they're not doing the things that you're describing. So is this something that all non-publics should be doing? Well, they should be, but is this something that all non-publics should be expected to be doing right now? Or is this something you can only expect at Kennedy Krieger?
I think that should all non-publics be doing certain things the answer would be no. I think that with all of our students with special, you know, with disabilities, the really important part is the individualization. And I think, you know, as we're talking about the representatives from Baltimore County, it starts with the IEP, it starts with the ICLP. And as Leslie said, we have to have these conversations with the families and the locals. You know, the only thing that makes non-publics different is there's an extra stakeholder in the mix, right? So we're trying to ensure that the individual student needs are met. We're going to follow the CDC guidelines. We're going to follow the guidelines mapped out by the Maryland State Recovery Plan. But then when you get right down to it, you still have to look at every individual student's IEP and their needs and their safety considerations and their behavioral considerations and their staffing considerations.
Okay.
And that's not exclusive to Kennedy Krieger.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I think somebody asked, so why Kennedy Krieger was a part of this conversation. So I just wanted to be transparent about the fact that I've been in many conversations and that I serve as the General Assembly liaison to the Board of Directors at Kennedy Krieger. And they have reached out and really want to listen to parent concerns and want to be a part of this conversation. I know Dr. Slager has only been here for a little over a year or so. And so they're really interested, particularly now, in improving services. And that's why they're here, is because they asked to be. So thank you for that. All right, well, I think that we've hit most of the questions, or a lot of the questions that I have, and we're way over time. So all I can do is thank all of you for being part of this conversation and being so open. The questions are tough, and we have a lot more ahead of us. So let's keep it going and know that, you know, we all have each other to depend on. For those who are out there on Facebook Live or watching on YouTube, please reach out to my office, michelleguyton.com, or the Facebook page that you're looking at now, if you have questions or concerns and you'd like guidance on these or any other issues, and we are always happy to help. Thank you so much.